And we're back. Thank you guys again for joining me for another Adobe Illustrator tutorial. This is the One Will Focus, and I am coming back for a mesh tutorial. It's been a while, and I have to explain to you guys why it's been so long. If you're seeing this later, of course, you won't understand the significance, but I've been gone for a little bit because my MacBook crashed. Isn't that excellent? I lost about a year's worth of work, or at least, hopefully, I didn't. They are recovering that now. So I had to take a pause and get accustomed to doing my sessions on my Cintiq. So if things seem slightly slower, it's just because I'm just getting the hang of moving a little bit faster on this. So please bear with me. All right, so let's get started. Not too long ago, I received an email asking for an advanced mesh tutorial. Now, advanced mesh could mean anything from, faces to objects in nature, whatever the case may be. But what we're going to cover is, making a bottle or a can. Now, the reason we're doing that is because the whole basis of a gradient mesh or a mesh is simply learning how to manipulate gradients as well as the actual mesh itself. You got to think of the mesh like wire. All right, so you can bend and you can shape this wire within a frame. So let's say we have a fence, and then you know how fences have the wire and it's intertwined. But let's say somebody gave you a fence and they just gave you vertical and horizontal lines within that fence. You then were required to shape and adjust them to any format that you wanted. Now, that's essentially what a mesh is. A mesh, if you've seen any of the other tutorials that I have, is simply a combination of vertical and horizontal lines within a shape. It can be any shape, but the structure of the lines may or may not change depending upon the actual base shape that it's based off of. So if you start with a simple shape, let's say a rectangle, and I'm going to draw a rectangle out here on the board. And let's say we were to pick our gradient mesh tool, which is the U key on your keyboard, and it's this little mesh icon. It looks like there are lines within a rectangle. I like to call it the leaf icon. Don't judge me. It looks like a leaf. I don't care what anybody says. So anyway, so we have this shape, right? And you'll notice that when you're not over the shape, your cursor is a normal cursor with a circle with a slash through it. But once you hover over the shape, you'll notice that it changes to a little rectangle with a horizontal and vertical line, or a square, and a plus symbol, which basically means to add a mesh. So I typically like to create one in the center. So I'm going to click that center point. And now we have our mesh lines, right? Now, right now, the fill of this is completely white. So let's change it to 100% cyan just to get some color. All right. Now, I only had this point selected, so it only changed the color for this point, which is essentially what a mesh does. It lets you individually change the colors and the opacity for these specific points that are within your mesh or without your mesh. Okay? So let's look at this like this. You can still see the frame of the actual rectangle once you hover over it, or even if you're not hovering over it, you can still see it there. So what you got to do is you can select, let's say we select this point, I can then change that to a completely different color. And what it does is it creates smooth gradations between those colors. All right. Now, I'm going to get rid of this shape. That's pretty much, and you know what? Let's just cover real quick. I can change the opacity. So we go to our transparency and we'll dip down on that a little bit and you'll notice how it changed. And you can do that individually for each point. So color and opacity can be changed. You can also, let's say we click out of this. Let's say we go back to our mesh tool. We can add more points. And it will add the same color and opacity that you did for the last used point, or color that you last used overall. Now you can take these points and you can push, pull, manipulate the anchor points, use your convert anchor point tool, grab these handles and shift them together. Whatever you want to do to manipulate it, you can do it. Individual handles. But it's the whole entire purpose of a gradient mesh. Now that's the basic tutorial. Now, for an advanced tutorial, what we're going to do is we're just going to create something really, really simple. And in our creation, I think we're going to do just like a bottle or a can. And I think the most complex thing for gradient meshes is figuring out how to create one. Now, there are a lot of ways to create a complex object with a gradient mesh. You don't want to start off typically with the complex object. That's usually where you'll run into problems. So let's say, as you saw before, our lines came out very, very symmetrical when we were clicking on the gradient uh, mesh that we had before, on the mesh tool. But the thing is, let's say we have a complex object, such as this, and we wanted to make a mesh out of it. Typically a mesh, as you see when you select the tool and the icon, it has a square with a horizontal and vertical line. But notice that each section is equal in that square. So it looks to make it equal. Because this shape is very complex and everything isn't equal in terms of the height and the width, as well as the different sides in the area, once you click on it, you're going to notice that the lines are trying to get to the midpoint at the top, get to the midpoint at the bottom, or whatever is closest, whatever the computer will calculate as the midpoint. And you'll notice it goes here and it goes here. Like it's trying to go straight up and down and straight left and right. As a result, you end up with these funny lines. Now, what happens is, let's say we change the color of that point. Now you'll see the error in these lines. And you'll have sharp, hard edges. For complex objects, you can either start with a complex object, and within that object, create smaller meshes that are less complex, or you can start with a simple object and use your anchor points and your tools that manipulate your anchor points in order to create a complex object out of the shape. So you create form out of the shape of the object itself. So that's what we're going to do for this tutorial, for this complex tutorial. So we're going to grab the rectangle tool, and we are going to just pull a rectangle out here. And let's change the color to like a lavender. Let's leave it at this. Now, for this specific tutorial, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you to turn on your rulers, and keep in mind I'm freestyling this, so I'm just going with the flow as I create this. I haven't done this beforehand, so if there are any hiccups, excuse me. But I'm giving this to you as I would do it naturally, figuring it out along the way. And so what I tend to do with a mesh, because I like to use a lot of anchor points, is I will typically grab the ruler and set certain points for my mesh or for my shape. So the first thing I'm going to do is, I know this is a bottle, and I know this is going to require me to do some shaping. So I'm going to grab a ruler and I'm going to drag it down. And I want this to be the first section of the bottle, the neck of the bottle. I'm also going to want to have a section for ridges at the top of the neck of the bottle. So I'm going to grab another one. I'm going to let these be the ridges for the top of the neck of the bottle. And you know what? I'm going to drag this up just a little bit. Let's go back. And again, bear with me because I'm using a completely different setup right now. So things, excuse me, are running a little differently. So let's take this, and we're going to end up adding anchor points to each one of these points. And I'm going to drag another one. Let's just, because we're going to make the bottom of the bottle curved. So we're going to click here and leave just enough space so that we can curve the bottom. Now, if you have Illustrator CC, one of the things that you'll notice is that in the new shapes, you can actually round the corners out by dragging these objects and pulling them. But we're not going to actually do that because, again, we want to keep our shape basic. Even though an oval or an ovalesque type shape is basic, we want it more rectangular in nature. So let's take our mesh tool and let's start creating points. So we're going to click, and an easier way to do this, once you have your rulers dragged out, is to make sure that you have your smart guides turned on, because that will actually, and we're going to click on snap to point. That'll actually make it easier for you to click in the appropriate areas when you're creating your mesh. And you only have to do it on one side, because remember, it creates a mesh on the left and right hand side, like these points, these anchor points. They have to reach across the shape. So you're automatically doing it on both sides. So now that we have our mesh points here, the first thing we want to do after that is to create at least one mesh point, let's say in the middle. So we're going to drag something out here, and let's leave it like right there. And then we'll drag or place a mesh point right at that intersection at the top. And now what that does is, let's turn off our rulers, is you'll now see that anywhere there was a mesh that went left to right, it now intersects in the middle. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab these first points on this side, and we're just going to do this really quick, and we're going to click the shift key and the arrow key to the left, and we're going to do it like 4 or 5 times just to get that in there. And we're going to do the same thing for the other side. Let's do that one more time. And we're going to actually move this a little bit because it's not centered, just so we have it centered. Okay. Now we have a bottle shape, but we also want to change this area on the bottom. So let's drag that in maybe 2 points. And this one 2 points. And then we can take our convert anchor point tool. Let's zoom in so we can see what we're doing. And we are going to drag this so that it is completely horizontal for that handle. Then we're going to get this other handle, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to drag it so it's completely horizontal. Hold the shift key while you're doing that so that it snaps properly, because if you don't, it'll just flex without having an angled snap, a precise one. So let's go back and make sure we have that right. Okay. Now, we can also turn our rulers back on, our guides rather, and we can click these handles. Let's drag another ruler down to the bottom, and we can click this handle with our convert anchor point tool, and we can bring it all the way down to that bottom ruler or bottom guide. And we're going to do the same thing for the other side. Now, the reason I'm using these guides on these is to make sure that it's symmetrical on both sides, because playing it or doing it just by looking, 9 times out of 10 will completely screw you over. Now, I kind of want a longer neck for the bottle, so I'm going to select these points. And just like any regular anchor point, I can move them up. And then I'm going to zoom out so I can see what the bottle looks like. And then I'm going to grab these points at the bottom, and I want it longer altogether. All right. Then let's make the overall shape a little thinner. So I'm going to grab it, hold the Alt key, and pull the sides in. So now I have a longer bottle, and this looks more like a wine bottle. Let's grab the bottom 2 points. Let's pull them up just a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the ruler again. I'm going to pull these rulers out to the edge of the bottle and let them snap. And then I'm going to take the convert anchor point tool, grab the handles of the edges, hold the shift key, and bring them out all the way. So let's select that, pull it out till it snaps, and then now we have the shape of the wine bottle that we wanted. Now, most people may indent the actual top of the wine bottle, give it a little indentation. So what we're going to do is figure out if we want this aspect of the wine bottle to be a little bit bigger than the other aspect. So let's zoom in, pull this down, and get our mesh tool, create one there, and create one here, and then one here. Actually, I have to zoom in a little bit more to create that one. And I'm going to select these, pull it in just a little bit. Let's see, that was only 1 over, so we're just going to move it in 1 over. We're going to select these 2 points, move them in 1 over, just to give the bottle an indent around the rim. Okay. All right, and now that we have the shape of the bottle, we can start using our mesh. So we can completely turn the guides off. We can highlight this just so we can see where everything is. And let's say our light source is coming. Let's say we want our light source to be right here, which means our shadows are going to be on the right-hand side. So we're going to want it slightly on the left, not completely, but slightly, which means this area right here is actually going to be the lightest part of our object. So let's create one more mesh area. I'm going to create it right here. And notice how it curves out and around the object, right? It's perfect. It does that because that's going to allow us to select the lighter area of our object. Now, we already have this color selected, but what we want to do is we're going to get, let's pull this out, and we can get rid of the rulers at the top. Let's select all of these. All right, just right there. And we're going to make them slightly lighter. And by doing this, right, we are automatically creating a smooth gradient between these individual shapes. So if you look at it, once we deselect it, you'll notice now it has a tad bit of dimension to it. Okay. We know that each side is going to be a little bit darker, but typically when you have shading, you have your highlights, you have your shadows, and you have your midtones. This lavender is going to be our midtone. This lighter bluish almost lavender is going to be our highlight, and then our shadows are going to be almost a darker purple. So if our light source is here, that means our shading typically is going to come around and be darker on this side. So let's grab a hold of, using our lasso tool, these points that are over here. And we will darken those after selecting them. So let's add some shading there and a little bit more purple on that side. And what you'll notice is that now that you've done this on this side, the actual shading will be darker on the right-hand side of the object. So now that we have that, we have our basic look. Now we can go in and we can start creating various smaller points. So let's say we want the ridge in the bottom of the bottle to be a little bit darker than everything else, because typically at the bottom of the bottle you're not going to be able to see everything. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to select these points. Let's say we select this, and let's just get these colors from our color panel and drop them in our swatches panel. And I am going to change this to that color so that it's the same. I'm going to bring this down just so that it's flat. And I'm going to make the bottom of the bottle the dark part. So let's create that. And let's give this another darker color. Just to give the shape of the bottom of the bottle something. And what we can do is let's create another mesh line. And we will make sure that these 2 points also reflect the color in the mesh. So that way we give more shape to the bottom of the bottle. Now, I'm going to want a little more shading over here, just like there was on the other side for the lighting. So I'm going to create a point that's right here, and I'm going to select, and keep in mind, it's going to keep doing this in terms of placing that specific color a certain way. So don't be alarmed if it does that. You can always go back in and you can change it. And I want this, let's say I don't want it that dark, but let's give it a sort of purple hue. And actually, we'll do this for all of them. And then now when we're looking at this, we'll notice that we can make this purple as well and change the darkness so that it flows more into this. And we could change this to be a little bit darker and a little bit more gray so that it's seated better with the bottom of the bottle. Okay. Now, in addition to this, we can also start to add, and this is just to briefly show you what you can do. The inner parts of the neck of the bottle. So let's grab these. We're going to have to zoom in to get a hold of these, but say we get these and select this and get rid of these. And then we can change this to the purple. And we can lighten it up just a little. And then we can select and pull out from that. Now we have a slight ridge to the bottle. We can actually change to go with the actual shading that's here. And we can change these two. And we can make them a little bit darker. And the same thing for these. And now we have a darker rim for the bottle. Now it's fairly simple that we have the actual setting for our bottle. And we can start to do smaller things if we wanted. We can either manipulate the lines that are here already by pushing and pulling them. And you'll notice how it'll start to give it slightly more depth. It doesn't necessarily have to be perfectly aligned in the middle, But I did that so that way we would be able to see how this was lining out. Now we know how lines would curve across an object like this. So we can always just slightly change it and tweak this so that it adjusts and curves how we want this to. And then we can start adding darker points. Let's make this point even lighter. And you'll see it started to take on a more bottle shape, something that has more form as opposed to just being a flat object. But again, you can always change these things. Like a lot of the times to add more depth to object, you'll add rim lighting, which is a short set of lighting that's, let's see, maybe we can do this and show you exactly what this is. I'm zooming the wrong way, but okay. So we would grab a point very, very close to the edge, and we would click that, and then we would make everything that's on that point a a highlight, a very striking highlight. So we got to be really careful not to select any of the other parts. So we're going to go all the way back up, around, straight here, and then we're going to, let's say we make that white. And what we can do is we can bring in the points that were closest to it so that it's not such a strikingly large highlight. Let's move that over. I hit the tab button there if you're wondering what just happened, why the screen did that. I hit the tab button, which gets rid of your panels. And I was trying to hit the Q button for the lasso, but we can give it slight rim lighting, and I'm going to select the same fill color. So that way I don't have to go through and individually select these. And then I'm going to still make this slightly lavender, but much lighter. Let's see. So that'll give me some rim lighting on the actual bottle itself. And that just adds a little bit more depth. One of the things, and don't feel like you're not getting this. Mesh tutorials or meshing takes an extremely long time for you to build the dimension and build the shape of what you want to do. I'm practically rushing through this just so that I can give you a quick glimpse as to what it would be like if you were to start dealing with the meshes. Now you can grab another highlight or a shape if you wanted to add it to it. I would clearly do more with this bottle, but I'm just giving you an idea of the basics of what you would have to do if you were to do something like this. And I can click this as a mesh point. And what I like to do is I'll select the whole thing, then get my direct selection tool and deselect the midpoint. I'll reduce the opacity of everything that's around it so that way I get a spot highlight. And when you go back, you'll notice that the edges are now soft. And I can change this to, let's say I wanted this completely white. And I could change the actual size and, place it on a corner or something just to make it look like there's some form of spotlight or light hitting it. Change the opacity. I can also change the mode to luminosity. And you can do this throughout the entire bottle. You also don't have to use mesh shapes to do highlighting or things of that nature. You can use, because it is a bottle and they're typically reflective, you can use any type of shape and just make sure you're doing very low opacities when you're doing stuff like this because whites or highlights can be very, very harsh. So you just want to make sure that when you're creating it, you're reducing the opacity a whole lot. So let's say we created, actually, let's go back. Let's say we created one that's here. It comes down around, back up. I'm just using the pencil tool to speed things along. And let's reduce that. And you'll notice how I have the slight highlight on the actual bottle itself. But again, you can continue to morph and do different things with these objects. Even with the mesh that's here, we can still add, like let's say we're here with this color, we can make it slightly lighter going that direction because it is rounded out around this rim area. And then let's say down here, we can make it just a little bit, hold on, just a little bit darker. But it's, again, it's all about adjusting things how you would see fit in your development process. And then, of course, you can change, remove, manipulate, do whatever you want with them. Let's grab these points up here. Let's make them darker. Let's get the purple. So any of these things will work out for it. Now, I accidentally just changed that color to white, to purple. So let's change it back to white. But you can do this, manipulate it, work around these, and of course, after a while, you'll notice how much you can actually change and manipulate different objects. Maybe in the near future, I'll do like a really advanced tutorial where we'll create a face or some complex object, or even a bottle or an iPad or something, and we'll create it to give you more knowledge for how the actual mesh works and what it will end up looking like. So thanks again, guys, for joining me for this tutorial. I will be having more up soon. I'm looking to get this computer back quickly, and hopefully things will move along. If you haven't, check out the How to Draw in Adobe Illustrator HG Remix tutorial. I'm going to be doing more of those as well. And just check out my content. I also have a new website up. You can check my website. I've consolidated my branding at The One Will Focus, TheOneWillFocus.com. So theonewillfocus.com and the One Will Focus on all social media. Okay, so I look forward to seeing you guys in the next tutorial. Thanks again. Take care.